Welcome to the On Your Mind podcast, where we are changing the mental health narrative, bringing hope and solutions. Here's your host, Timothy J. Hayes, psychologist.
Sue Muncaster is a writer and poet who lives in Teton Valley, Idaho, where she serves on the Victor City Council, is an executive director of Teton Leadership Center, and works as a communication consultant for sustainable development. Through her essays, poetry, activism, and consulting, she aims to build community by offering an alternative to our divisive and toxic times by bringing to light the mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual practices of people living wild, peaceful, resilient lives. Well, Sue, welcome. It's great to see you again. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me again.
It's been a few years, and there's been a lot that's gone on in your life. And the last time we got together, it's because you'd written a beautiful article about trying to support your brother through his struggles. And I'm hoping you can give us an update and tell us what you've been working on recently.
Well, in my personal life, my update is my brother, who was a very intelligent, gentle conspiracy theorist, is what I don't know, that's the best way I could describe it. That's what my article was about in the Huffington Post 2.5 years ago. That got so much attention was trying to better understand conspiracy theories and how family members can support and stay connected to family members. Unfortunately, I learned a lot, but we ended up definitely pretty much fractured as a family. And in the end, I was living with my father at the time, taking care of him. And my father was so distressed by the whole situation that he asked my siblings and I to just not have any more contact with my brother. I did continue to have contact with my brother, but it just got crazier and crazier every time I contacted him or talked to him. So it's probably had been 6 months or so since the last time we'd heard of him. We follow him on TikTok, and for a while I would try to follow him on Telegram, but I couldn't deal with that platform. He ended up having a stroke, and his daughter took him to the hospital. He was living in Texas, and he basically had, no job, no income, was so distrustful of any government assistance or medical care or anything. He did end up getting some care for his stroke for a couple of weeks, but he was basically indigent. And even though his kids applied for some charity for him, he eventually had to leave the hospital. And so he and his wife at that time were homeless for a couple months. And he ended up passing away about a month ago. Was living under a bridge near Austin, Texas. And so since then, my siblings and I have been trying to support his adult children, who are they would be an amazing study in themselves. They're just very resilient, very responsible, really cool kids that have been taking care of themselves basically since they were teenagers. So that's been some disruption. My father passed away about a year ago on my brother's birthday.
Oh, wow.
Which is interesting coincidence. So within a year, dad and brother both passed away, which has been difficult, but also just incredibly liberating for me. They were both, between their relationships with each other and their relationships with me, even though everybody talked about love and family and this and that, they were relationships based on control and expectations, and you got to play by the rules, and if you don't play by the rules, I can't accept you. And so that's really sent me down this path in my writing and my thinking and studying about dignity and systems of superiority and the patriarchy, etc. So that's where I've been. That's what I've been writing about. And then in my professional life, I've been doing a lot of work with two different things. One is basically conscious capitalism. We started an organization here in the Tetons called the Teton Leadership Center, which is focused on purpose-driven, values-based leadership practices, specifically in the business world, but we do a lot of work with other organizations, elected officials, nonprofits. And I'm also involved in destination stewardship planning with George Washington University Institute for Tourism Studies. So that's going into communities and helping them develop community-based tourism strategies to mitigate the impacts of tourism and make sure tourism is benefiting the community as well as the environment. So those are my ambitious goals, but they all are really interconnected of, basically how can we have better relationships? How can we be better ancestors? How can we do business differently and change paradigm shifts? Because the direction we're going right now is obviously not ideal.
Well, the key words for me in what you're saying are respect and dignity.
Mm.
And as we were talking about a few years ago, it's very difficult to engage with somebody who is so intensely focused on, their belief system or their fears, and still communicate respect for them and, respect for their own dignity, even if they aren't really functioning from that level. And just applaud you for the way you wrote about it with your brother and the focus on how can we just maintain the awareness that we're just people dealing with other people, that has to be, the top priority for our goal is to be able to recognize that in every communication.
I'm curious what you think. So we're talking about a second article that I just wrote on my Substack, which is called Teton Strong, about just this idea of unconditional love. Like that's just something that I've really struggled with is, my brother in his most difficult times would, he'd say, but I love you, or you love me, or you love this. But then he would do something that was so outrageous or say something so outrageous that was not a loving thing, but somehow that had this expectation that, or he would say you are a bad person for deserting me or not listening to me or not trusting me or whatever. And
if you loved me, you would do X, Y, and Z.
oh, totally. Yeah, that's a better way to say it. So I really struggled with that, looking back on behaviors of my brother and my father, and then reflecting. Of course, I always say that the things that bug me the most about other people are things that I notice in myself that I don't like and I want to change. And so, yeah, I guess I'm just on this journey of in my personal life, as a parent, as a friend, as I'm on a city council in my small town, and then in my professional work is how can we all be better ancestors and make sure that the work we're doing, everything that we do, is building people up versus breaking things down.
Well, and there are so many things in what you just said. One of them is related to one of the bottom line observations I give to patients when they come in a first or second session. And that observation is that I'll never be upset about anything anybody else ever says or doesn't do that I think they should, unless I'm still judging myself negatively for doing the same or similar thing. And if I can't get myself to go look at that hidden part of my own self-loathing or self-judgment and dismantle it and replace it with compassion for myself for whatever was going on in the past when I pulled that bonehead move or whatever, right? If I can't replace my judgment with compassion, then I'll never be able to have a compassionate view when I look at somebody else who's doing the same thing. And the other thing that you were mentioning is this concept of unconditional love or love in all conditions. And I love how you wrote about it and talked about what you've I believe what you're coming to is the idea that this unconditional love is just about me extending that loving energy or frame of viewing someone without expecting a return, without saying that as I send you this loving energy or I try to see you as a loving person, then you better do what I think you should do. Right? You should better toe the line according to what I think is appropriate behavior. Is that what you were coming to in that Substack article at the end?
Yeah, but then I also think that, so I've also been doing a lot of work with indigenous communities and really, I mean, since we talked, really throwing myself into better understanding indigenous values, et cetera. And then there's also this idea of reciprocity, service and reciprocity, where there are times that relationships are, I feel like often we just give and give and give and give and give, and when there is no reciprocity, there is, or definitely toxic relationships, there's a time that you have to cut that off and say that, I can't continue in this toxic relationship. And that's basically what happened with my brother. And in my article, I was like, wait, did I desert you? And I'm feeling guilty that, we deserted you under this bridge, but really it was your choices that got you there. So that's what I struggle with. I think there is an aspect of reciprocity in relationships where I use that term of bucket fillers. I think it's such a good, if somebody is listening to or watching this and has any children, there's so many good books about this idea of people filling your bucket and people who take out of your bucket, and how you can fill other people's buckets and how you can take out of other people's buckets. And there's a point where when your bucket's empty, or somebody just keeps taking, that you have to walk away. And
Yeah.
that's where I struggle with unconditional love and this
Well,
expectation that family.
I think you have to, if you're going to get clear about the concepts, you have to separate the idea of unconditional love from this thing about reciprocity and bucket filling or draining. Adam Grant has a book titled Give and Take, where he defines people who are givers, naturally, people who are takers, and people who are matchers. And the matchers will only give to you if you give back to them in equal measure. And they've got a checklist going. And if they give you 5 units of something, you better give them 5 units right back. And he talks about how his research revealed that the givers, he thought he would find that they're overrepresented in the lower quadrant of the socioeconomic level, that because people give away all their money and they end up poor. But when he did the evaluation, he found out that they were overrepresented both in the lower one quarter of the socioeconomic scale and in the upper one quarter. And so he went to try and figure out what's the difference between somebody who's naturally a giver who ends up poor and someone who's naturally a giver who ends up, a millionaire or billionaire. And he talks about how the people on the upper end of the scale who are givers, they give to themselves and their family first, right? And so when they're giving and they're extending that natural desire they have to give and the benefit they get, how it lights them up inside to see somebody receive something from them, they're giving from their abundance. They're not giving from their emptiness, their lack. The next thing is they have some discrimination about who they give to, and they make sure they give more to other givers who are then going to give. And so it kind of promulgates and expands rather than giving to takers who are going to just hoard it and shrivel everything up and absorb all these resources. So that I think is it's important for me anyway, to separate that out from my having loving intention and in sending blessing energy to somebody, even as I walk away from them, because I don't want to be used and abused. I don't have to walk away from them, cursing them or, holding rage that I think is directed toward them, but really chewing me up inside. And so I separate the idea of the loving and unconditional love from healthy boundaries and healthy limits and the idea of giving versus taking or matching. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Do you, I guess what I've been thinking about also is, as far as mental health, as well as just behaviors that are going on in our country right now. I just really do think that there's so many people who are not able to find a purpose or realize their dignity. I mean, there's different ways to say it, find belonging, etc. That they're, between social media, the American dream, judgment, comparison, etc. I feel like there's so many people that are just lost out there. And that's what's leading to the depression and anxiety, etc., of not being able to be yourself, not find, whether it's within our families or within our work or within our culture or where we live. I think about this a lot with the indigenous communities, as when they were put on reservations and moved from their land and put into these situations where they could no longer live with what their true nature and their ancestry and their DNA was. That, what did they get out of it? They got, poor, addiction, violence. Not all of them, but that's where right now all these indigenous communities are starting to regain their dignity and return to their roots and their value systems and beliefs. And what's coming out of it is super exciting and a lot for all of us to learn from.
Well, and what you're pointing to is one of the serious problems in our culture is that the individual quite often is not taught about how to create their own sense of purpose or create the focus in their lives that really lights them up inside, or the kind of activities that they fall into where when they're doing them they lose track of time. And we're not encouraged, we're not told that that's possible. As children, we're not encouraged to tap into our creative and intuitive resources and strengthen them and develop them. For the most part, we're taught how to be good consumers.
Mm.
And that's not a very fulfilling role. So whenever I run across something like the Passion Test or Michael Rice's Secondary Purpose or Greg Moore's Heart Virtue, and people talk about how to find and craft their own personal mission statement or their family's mission statement. I encourage that highly with people because it's like this guiding light for your life, and it helps you focus your energy in a way that produces positive results inside yourself, and then you ripple that out into the family and community that you're functioning in. But without that, if all you're doing is what the culture teaches you to do, you're just becoming a good consumer. And it's a hollow existence as far as I'm concerned.
That's what I think is tearing at least this Western culture in the US apart. Yeah.
Well, when you look at it, if like, and we have another set of opportunities to look at it. When everything is going smoothly and there's no tornadoes or hurricanes and earthquakes, and uh, people churn through their lives sucking up the media and consuming and trying to find a way to make more money so they can consume more, and they drift further and further apart, and they're more susceptible to the messages of hatred and fear, and then you get something like one of the two hurricanes that's come through recently, and you find people on the ground, they're not interviewing each other about, well, who you're voting for. They're saying, what do you need to get by tonight? Can I comfort you? Can I share my stuff with you? Can I help find your pet or what? And so we're back into this humans relating to humans, and the essence of our nature and our, that people talk about Darwin's book, Survival of the Fittest, the Origin of the Species, and this big thing that comes out of it, Survival of the Fittest. And that's really just a cherry-picked concept out of that book. He talks a lot more about cooperation, collaboration, and love in that book, and interconnection, because you've got herds and you've got flocks and you've got, colonies of insects that work together. And if you stop and think about it, nothing that's really wonderful about the human condition has happened because one person decided to build a skyscraper, or one person decided to, you know, create a surgery procedure. It's always about collaboration, cooperation, working together. And it's kind of hidden from us. It's right there in front of us, right? It's that level of a secret that's right in front of our faces. But instead, we're pumped full of thoughts about competition, and we have all of these Olympics and all of these sports teams that, well, we want to know who's number one and who scored. Well, who cares? It's a wonderful display of pageantry and athleticism and coordination and teamwork. Who cares what the final score is? We can still enjoy what we care because we've been trained to believe that that's more important. And the truth of it is, what's more important is inner satisfaction, connection to others. If you talk to functional medicine specialists, they say it's not rocket science what it takes to have a healthy, productive life, but it's not just clean food, clean water, and decent sleep. It's a sense of community and connection. It's a sense of purpose in your life. It's this energy of love exchange with others, and the food and the rest and the nutrition. So it's up to us as, individuals to make sure we're doing that for ourselves and then extending that to others wherever we can.
Yeah, I think that that's what I've just keep coming back to, this idea of systems of superiority, that's where um, what I wrote in my um, op-ed that's coming out soon was that basically, even just like thinking of the pilgrims coming here and escaping religious persecution and all the people who came here, but then turning around and doing the same thing that was done to them to the next person. And that's what I want to just do my little part in my little bit of writing that maybe impact other people, of like, how can we just stop that crazy, just continual thing? And I think it's a paradigm shift of getting away from winners and losers, scarcity versus abundance. I loved you said abundance earlier. I mean, I think that's key, especially here in the US. There is so much abundance that it's crazy that we're hoarding everything that we have and just trying harder to dress better or have a better car or build a bigger house, etc., than the other, the next person. And it's, yeah, a hollow existence living in that. So there, I have a little thing that I wrote down from a book I read, which is called Decolonizing Wealth, which is a fantastic book about how nonprofit, it's basically based on nonprofits, how the money is always, even if it's for marginalized communities, the decisions are all still made by the wealthy donors who tend to not be marginalized community members. So anyways, that even in the nonprofit world, he talks about, the current paradigm is divide, control, exploit. And the paradigm shift is connect, relate, belong. And I thought that was such a beautiful way of saying, like, that's the ambitious goal of some of these initiatives, is this, just what you said, connecting, collaborating, and belonging. And if we as a nation could figure that out, a good example for everybody.
Right. And the sky's the limit if you can figure that out, right? There's a book by David Graeber and David Wengrow titled The Dawn of Everything. Subtitle is A New History of Humanity. And in that book, they lay out how there have been cultures that understood this. It didn't follow a leader blindly. They didn't follow a president or a king or a dictator. And they had some leaders, but they were leaders in title only. And everything that happened, and some of the indigenous people here on this continent, when they came over, followed this model. And the leader didn't have any authority to make anybody do anything. People did things or chose not to do things based on their conversations. And so They had an extensive practice of debate and discussion and conversation, and there was a level of equanimity and equality in that culture that some people say, well, it can't be. You can't have a culture that runs, so you can't have any organization. You need a leader, and it's not the case. There have been systems where people have collaborated and cooperated as groups and fairly large groups and been very successful with a different system. And it's not a structure of hierarchy and allegiance. It's about connection. It's about collaboration and support.
I think about that too, and one of the ideas that I have is it's not necessarily like when you say this, or not you, but people say this, then you get called a socialist or a communist or whatever. But so I don't argue against leadership. I certainly don't argue against leadership, but I think that the problem is that or hierarchies or it's what the hierarchies and the leaders are based on. I mean, right now they're based on the person with the most money, which often is not because of who they are as a person. It might be because of their privilege and how they got there. I mean, certainly sometimes the person with the most money worked their ass off and came from poverty and did something. But it's how we judge our leaders. It's how we set up our hierarchies and who's in charge. It's not necessarily the person who is best able to help others reach their potential. There are people with better leadership skills that can help others or want to help others reach their potential. So I think there's an opportunity for leadership and hierarchy. It's just like what we base it on is what's twisted.
Yeah, and what's valued, right? I mean, like if in the culture what is most valued is the person who can score the most points and gather the most money, and so we throw millions of dollars at those people, then that's the system. That's what it values. And what we're advocating for, a lot of us, people like you and me, are advocating for people to really reconsider what they value and what they're willing to pour their time, intelligence, money, and energy into. And if you have a shift in values and you have a cooperative effort, collaboration with teams and groups of people, there's just practically nothing you can't do, which includes pulling ourselves back from the brink of another war or a civil war or destroying the water, destroying the air, etc. And we've demonstrated it several times.
Well, that's where I feel
just in
like
my lifetime.
as we were talking, I was like, when's this going to get more political? Because it's going to, I think that like the crazy stuff that we're seeing and all the lying and whatnot that's going on is people are so desperate to hold on to the old value system, the old systems of superiority, that they're doing anything that they can because they're afraid that, if the value systems change, which is like the criticism of the woke people, is that like that's a huge shift in value system. And I have no doubt that today's younger generations, when there's a huge shift with that, which I'm so proud of and excited for, of what we're talking about, people really being themselves and creating different values that are more equitable and just for and opportunities for people of different genders and races, etc., to thrive. I lost my train of thought here, but that's where, yeah, I think that
The
the
idea is
people who
that,
are at the top right now are so desperate to hang on that they're willing to do anything. They're selling their souls
well,
for.
and they're promoting fear, right? They're saying that this shift is going to be disastrous when in fact the shift to a different set of values is usually the thing that raises everybody up. And the only way they're trying to hold on to power is to generate fear that change is a bad thing. Where if you look back at our history and recorded history and history in this country, you'll find that there's this shift and this flow of this pendulum from side to side but gradually we're moving forward. We're moving to a more loving, inclusive, more productive, less warlike status. And we've got, fits and starts with it. It doesn't mean we should give up, that as a goal, to be more loving, to be more respectful, to promote our dignity and the dignity of everyone we're dealing with. And, as we're talking about in dealing with someone like your brother, it's so difficult when we have somebody who's dealing with mental health issues or a crisis in their mental health functioning. It's difficult for us in the way our culture is set up to afford them dignity, to extend them dignity, to help remind them of their own dignity. And that's one of the things that touched me about, the articles that you've written and the way you were trying to so diligently to work with your brother. It is a challenge, as you know. I mean, you're right there in the trenches with it still.
It's been really hard with everything that's happening with the election and stuff of, like, I feel like most people, they look at conspiracy theories, they look at Marjorie Taylor Greene, and at least people in my world, they laugh and make fun of her and, watch Comedy Central Daily Show and satirize how crazy it all is. But when it affects you, when your brother's passes out under a bridge, homeless because of all this, shit's getting real. It's
Right.
people are dying because of this. It's not just fun and games and a power struggle or whatever it is. It's and we talked about this a little bit the other day of like, I still am really struggling with how much of it is mental health and how much of it is just um, like people trying to get attention. Or I guess that it does affect mental health. But for example, just with my if you're thinking of mental health as a physiological change in or physiological process in your brain that's somehow different than a healthy brain, how does that explain that my brother and his wife were like doing the same thing? And, would they be diagnosed both with all the things that people wanted to diagnose them with based on some of my other articles? Or are they just people who trying to get attention, desperate for attention and willing to say anything and I mean, going back to belonging, I do think one big part of it is this internet black hole you can go into and belong because suddenly you have 90,000 fans on your TikTok and you're making $200 a day by coming up with the most outrageous lie you can think of. So that's just where I really struggle with him and his wife, who's still around, of like, what does she really believe and what is she just trying to get attention? And
Well, so you touch on something that was the topic of several of my interviews in the past year, a couple of them with Robert Whitaker and Roger McFillin, and it is the idea of, are we diagnosing, which means just to come up with a label, and training people to think about their emotions as symptoms of a mental health disorder or a disease that needs to be diagnosed and then have a prescription written for it. And that's basically, unfortunately, what the mental health and psychiatric and psychological fields have become to a great extent. And the question has to be asked, how useful is that? Especially if, when you track the increase in the labels of diagnoses and then the medications being prescribed for them, you see that increasing dramatically, and then you also see a dramatic increase in the number of people that are filing for mental health disability at the same time. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't seem that method of labeling and then writing prescriptions for a pattern of behavior is helping people, in a trend. So then, instead of thinking, is somebody who's got a mental health problem somebody who's got an altered brain chemistry? Instead of thinking of that as the brain chemistry got altered and that's causing the behavior problem, and then if you give a drug to fix the brain chemistry, that the behavior problem goes away, which is a false equivalency. It doesn't work because you're making a guess that when you see these two things happen close to each other, one of them caused the other. And instead of just watching the correlation and noticing there's a movement of these factors in some kind of a similar flow, and then digging in to try and explore, okay, so what's causing that? Is one of those things causing the other? Or is there a third or fourth or 17th different factor that's making both of them move along with, dozens of other factors? And so we start to understand most people who have a mental health issue, especially decades ago before all these meds came up, they would have an episode and eventually, usually within a year or so, it would resolve and there'd be almost no recidivism. It wouldn't recur again over and over in that person's life. But now that we have these labels for these things we call diagnoses and these medications, and we start filling these people with these drugs, what we notice is there's an episode and it maybe never fully resolves, and then there's another one and another one, and we have a system that's broken. So instead of thinking, okay, this person's acting this way because their brain chemistry is off, let's try to understand, if we help this person understand the traumas of their childhood, what they're doing in their relationships today that's either fulfilling or not, whether or not they're getting decent nutrition and rest, and giving them a sense of purpose in life or helping them choose their own sense of purpose in life. And we watch how often that leads to resolution of what we were calling the mental health problem. Then we start to understand it's not, hey, I don't have enough Prozac in my system. And that's why I'm having these, angry thoughts, or the kind of thing that was happening with your brother, a lot of paranoid thoughts, etc. It's a complex system, and our way of dealing with it in the psychological and psychiatric professions is coming into some serious questioning because the results just aren't there. The good, lasting results aren't there when it comes to just let's diagnose and treat symptoms with medications.
I just read about a new nonfiction book that came out. I think it's called Misdiagnosed or something like that, but it's a really successful writer for the big publication, New Yorker, etc. And she basically goes through her life and all the different diagnoses that she had, and it's a memoir of going back to like what not. I don't think it's critical of the psychiatric and psychology trade, but just basically supporting what you're saying, that there were some people were so willing ever since she was a teenager. It started with like anorexia and eating disorder, and then this and that and the other thing, and now she's 50, and she's figured stuff out for herself, and reflecting back on how much damage was done by this need to make a diagnosis.
Yeah. And then what do you do? Well, according to that system, you've got this diagnosis, and we come at it because we've listed these symptoms. Now we have to figure out a way to wipe out the symptoms, but we're not doing anything in that work to look at what's the fundamental cause, right? And we're not doing anything to promote fundamental systemic health, lifting all these factors together to build this healthy human organism. And a healthy human organism is one that's in relationship. It's not in isolation. So, well, there's a lot more to talk about, but I realize we're getting close to time. Let me ask you to just get centered and take a breath and come up with what you'd like to leave us with. What how people can follow you on Substack, and what you hope people take away from this conversation and the writing you're doing and the work you're doing.
Well, people can follow me on Substack, Teton Strong, or you can just Google my name, Sue Muncaster, and you'll find your way there. What I want is people to help, like you, to help challenge these ideas I have about. I mean, I'm trying to write a book in the next year And the working title right now is True Nature: Disrupting Systems of Superiority, Realizing Dignity, and Becoming Better Ancestors. So that's my long working title, but I'm trying to pack all those three things in there. I have so many ideas, so many thoughts, so many resources, piles of notes on my desk. And I'm just trying to get some feedback on, is that something that resonates with people? Would they read it? What are their experiences? And for people who are listening to this, I just think the thing that has really helped me, and that's the other thing I have to share, is how can I be going through all these incredible stressful situations, super challenging, etc., and different skills that I've come up with over the years to be able to deal with it. And a connection to nature for sure is one of them. That's a connection to nature, good eating, good health, relationship, recreation, fun. I mean, I can't believe people are writing books about how to have fun because I have a lot of fun. So just happy to talk to people. They can reach out to me. People can find me many different ways. And here too, I guess, so I just turned 61 next week. And I feel like this is the crone time, the crone years, where you're supposed to be giving back the knowledge that you've gained over time. And that's what I'm hoping to do. So if you're interested, follow me. And I'm not looking for likes. I'm looking for challenging my thinking and making it better.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for what you're doing. I look forward to continuing to follow you on Substack and to reading the book when it comes out.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Take care.
Have a beautiful day.
Sue Muncaster is a writer and poet who lives in Teton Valley, Idaho, where she serves on the Victor City Council, is an executive director of Teton Leadership Center, and works as a communication consultant for sustainable development. Through her essays, poetry, activism, and consulting, she aims to build community by offering an alternative to our divisive and toxic times by bringing to light the mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual practices of people living wild, peaceful, resilient lives. I interviewed Sue in 2022 after reading an article that she published in the Huffington Post about her journey to understand her gentle, intelligent brother's deep dive into fantastical conspiracy theories. In September of this year, her brother, who eventually became homeless and was living under a bridge near Austin, Texas, passed away. Since we talked in 2022, Sue has continued to study the cultural pressures that, despite our riches, have devastated too many Americans, with a collapse of our inner lives due to conspiracy, addiction, depression, and anxiety that is rampant across all income levels. Her inquiry and personal growth inspired her to start a book project called True Nature: Cultivating Dignity, Disrupting Systems of Superiority, and Becoming Better Ancestors. True Nature explores the ancient, universal, multicultural concept of dignity as a bridge between diverse worldviews and a catalyst for personal and societal change in an increasingly complex world. Following her progress is possible on Substack under the title Teton Strong.
You've been listening to the On Your Mind podcast, offered by Journey's Dream, where we support people through mental health challenges to a place of true and lasting well-being. If you love our show, we invite you to visit onyourmindpodcast.org to join the conversation, access the show notes, and discover our helpful resources. Thank you for listening.